The morning bell rang through Jefferson Elementary, signaling the start of another day. Teachers shuffled into their classrooms with coffee cups in hand, greeting students who bounced through the hallways with backpacks nearly as large as they were. In room 12, Ms. Sarah Mitchell arranged colorful alphabet cards along the whiteboard, her routine as familiar as breathing after 9 years of teaching kindergarten. She loved this age group, the wonder in their eyes when they learned something new, the honesty that hadn't yet been filtered by social expectation, the pure joy they brought to the smallest discoveries. Her students filed in one by one, each finding their assigned seat at the circular tables scattered around the room. There was Marcus, already pulling out his favorite dinosaur pencil case. There was Emma, carefully placing her lunchbox in her cubby. There was little Jaden, who waved enthusiastically at everyone despite having seen them just yesterday. And then there was Lily Thompson, a petite girl with dark curls pulled into 2 ponytails, wearing a yellow dress that seemed just a bit too big for her frame. Sarah smiled at Lily as she entered, but immediately noticed something odd. While the other children settled into their chairs, chatting excitedly about their evening adventures or the cartoon they watched before school, Lily stood beside her assigned seat at the blue table. She set her small backpack down carefully, unzipped it with deliberate slowness, and pulled out a worn notebook and a pencil. But she didn't sit. She remained standing, her small hands resting on the table's edge, her eyes following Sarah's movements around the room. "Lily, sweetie, you can sit down now," Sarah called gently across the classroom, her voice warm and encouraging. "We're about to start our morning circle." Lily looked at her teacher, offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and nodded. But she didn't move to sit. Instead, she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her fingers drumming lightly against the table's surface. Sarah made a mental note but didn't push it. Sometimes children were particular about their routines, especially at the beginning of the week. Maybe Lily had slept poorly. Maybe she was feeling restless with energy to burn. There were 1,000 innocent explanations, and Sarah had learned long ago not to make mountains out of molehills on a Monday morning. The class moved into their opening activities. They sang the Days of the Week song, counted to 30 together, and talked about the weather outside. Through it all, Lily participated from her standing position, her voice joining the chorus of others, her hand occasionally raising when Sarah asked questions. She seemed engaged, seemed happy even, but she absolutely would not sit down. By mid-morning, when Sarah distributed worksheets for a simple counting exercise, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Every other child sat comfortably at their table, crayons scattered around them as they worked on connecting numbered dots to reveal hidden pictures. Lily stood, leaning over her paper at an awkward angle, her small hand gripping her crayon perhaps a bit too tightly as she worked. "Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too." "Miss Mitchell, why is Lily standing?" Marcus asked loudly, his voice cutting through the quiet concentration of the room. Several other heads popped up, turning to look at Lily with the frank curiosity that only 5-year-olds could muster without shame. Lily's cheeks flushed pink, and she ducked her head lower toward her paper. "Marcus, everyone works differently," Sarah replied smoothly, moving toward his table to redirect his attention. "Now, show me how you're doing with connecting those dots." But the question had been planted, and children were nothing if not observant. Sarah noticed small glances being thrown Lily's way throughout the rest of the morning. During story time, when the class gathered on the reading carpet, Lily chose to kneel at the back of the group, rather than sitting cross-legged like her peers. When Sarah gently suggested she might be more comfortable sitting, Lily shook her head quickly and whispered, "I like kneeling better." At lunch, Sarah observed from her position near the cafeteria entrance as her students picked up their trays and found seats at the designated kindergarten tables. Lily moved through the line with everyone else, accepting her small carton of milk and the day's offering of chicken nuggets and green beans. But when she reached the tables, she didn't sit on the bench. She stood at the end, her tray balanced in front of her on the table's edge, eating while the others sat on both sides. One of the lunch monitors, Mrs. Rodriguez, approached Lily with concern. Sarah watched from a distance as the older woman bent down, speaking quietly to the girl. Lily shook her head at whatever was being said, her ponytails swaying with the motion. Mrs. Rodriguez straightened, looking puzzled, then caught Sarah's eye across the cafeteria. Sarah made her way over. "What's going on?" Sarah asked quietly, keeping her voice low so as not to draw more attention to Lily. "I asked her to sit down, but she says she doesn't want to," Mrs. Rodriguez explained, her weathered face creased with confusion. "I thought maybe she was being silly, but she seems genuinely resistant. Should I insist?" Sarah looked at Lily, who had resumed eating her lunch, her eyes fixed on her tray. There was something about the set of the girl's shoulders, a tension that seemed unusual for someone so young. "No, let her stand," Sarah decided. "I'll keep an eye on it." The afternoon brought more of the same. During art time, Lily stood at the easel while painting a picture of what appeared to be a house, with a large tree beside it. During music class, she stood in the back row while the other children sat on the floor for the ABC song with hand motions. During the final free play period before dismissal, when most children claimed spots at various play stations around the room, Lily gravitated toward the standing height puppet theater, manipulating the small cloth figures while other children around her sat with building blocks or at the miniature kitchen set. As the dismissal bell rang and parents began arriving to collect their children, Sarah made sure to catch Lily before she left. She knelt down to the girl's level, bringing her eyes in line with Lily's. "Lily, I noticed you didn't sit down today," Sarah began gently, her voice nothing but kind concern. "Is everything okay? Does your tummy hurt? Or maybe you have a boo-boo that makes sitting uncomfortable?" Lily's eyes widened slightly, and for just a moment something flickered across her face. Was it fear? Panic? But it was gone so quickly that Sarah couldn't be sure. The girl shook her head, those ponytails bouncing again. "I'm okay, Miss Mitchell," Lily said, her voice small but steady. "I just don't feel like sitting today." "Okay, sweetie, but if something is bothering you, you can always tell me." "That's what I'm here for." Sarah gave her a warm smile and patted her shoulder gently. Lily returned the smile, nodded, and then hurried toward the door where her mother waited. Sarah watched as Lily approached her mother, a thin woman in her early 30s wearing scrubs that suggested she worked in healthcare. The woman smiled at her daughter, took her hand, and led her out without seeming to notice anything unusual. Sarah stood there for a long moment after they'd gone, turning the day's observations over in her mind. It was probably nothing, she told herself. Children went through phases. They had their quirks and peculiarities. Just last month, she'd had a student who insisted on wearing mittens indoors for 2 straight weeks before suddenly stopping. Before that, there'd been a boy who would only respond when addressed by his favorite superhero name. Kids were strange and wonderful and unpredictable, but as Sarah tidied her classroom and prepared for the next day, she couldn't quite shake the image of Lily standing beside that chair, her small face so carefully neutral, her body language screaming discomfort, even as she insisted everything was fine. Tuesday morning arrived with overcast skies that threatened rain but never quite delivered. Sarah greeted her students at the door as always, accepting high fives and listening to excited chatter about a television show that apparently everyone except her had watched last night. When Lily appeared, Sarah paid particular attention, searching for any sign of what might be causing the previous day's behavior. "Good morning, Lily," she said brightly. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," Lily replied, her voice cheerful enough, her smile present but somehow not quite reaching her eyes. The pattern from Monday repeated itself almost exactly. Lily entered the classroom, approached her seat, and remained standing beside it. She participated in the morning activities from that position, her voice joining in songs, her hand raising to answer questions, her attention apparently focused on the lessons. But she would not sit. By Wednesday, the other children had begun to notice more openly. During morning circle, when Sarah asked everyone to find a spot on the carpet, several students patted the floor beside them, inviting Lily to sit near them. She smiled and thanked them, but chose instead to kneel at the back of the group, just as she had on Monday. "Lily's being weird," Emma whispered to Marcus, though not quietly enough to escape Sarah's hearing. "She probably just likes standing," Marcus whispered back, with the supreme confidence of someone who had decided he understood the situation completely. At recess, Sarah observed from her position monitoring the playground. Most of her students ran immediately to the swings or the climbing structure, their energy boundless and their voices carrying across the asphalt. Lily wandered to the far side of the playground, to a quiet corner where a small garden had been planted by last year's third-grade class. She stood there, examining the flowers that bloomed in defiance of the gloomy weather, occasionally bending at the waist to smell one, but never crouching or sitting on the small decorative bench positioned beside the garden. Sarah made her way across the playground, maintaining her supervising duties while angling toward Lily's position. When she reached the garden, she stood beside the girl, both of them looking at a cluster of yellow daisies that bobbed in the light breeze. "These are pretty, aren't they?" Sarah remarked casually. "They're my favorite color," Lily said softly, reaching out to touch one petal with the tip of her finger. "Yellow is happy." "It is a happy color," Sarah agreed. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Lily, I've noticed you haven't been sitting in class, and I want you to know that if something is wrong, if something hurts, you can tell me. I promise I'll help you." Lily's hand froze where it had been reaching for another flower. Her entire body seemed to tense, her shoulders drawing up toward her ears. She pulled her hand back slowly and clasped both hands in front of her yellow dress, which Sarah now noticed was actually the same dress from Monday, though that could mean nothing. Plenty of children had favorite clothes they wanted to wear repeatedly. "I'm fine," Lily said, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost rehearsed, as if she'd been taught exactly what to say. "I just like standing better." "Okay," Sarah said gently, not wanting to push too hard and shut down whatever fragile communication might be possible. "But my offer stands. Anytime you want to talk about anything, my door is always open." Lily nodded but didn't look at her teacher. Instead, she turned her attention back to the flowers, effectively ending the conversation. That afternoon, during a bathroom break, Sarah encountered Mrs. Henderson, the school nurse, in the hallway. She pulled the older woman aside, keeping her voice low. "I have a student who's been exhibiting some concerning behavior," Sarah began, quickly outlining the situation with Lily. "It's been 3 days now, and she absolutely refuses to sit. She'll stand, she'll kneel, but sitting seems to cause her some kind of distress." Mrs. Henderson frowned, her experienced eyes showing immediate concern. "Have you noticed any other signs? Bruising, changes in behavior, withdrawal?" "Not exactly," Sarah admitted. "She's still participating in class, still engaging with others, though maybe a bit more reserved than usual. But the sitting thing is consistent and seems almost desperate, like she's protecting herself from something." "Have you contacted the parents?" "Not yet. I wanted to give it another day or two, make sure I wasn't overreacting, but I think I need to reach out." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "Trust your instincts, Sarah. You've been teaching long enough to know when something isn't right. Document everything you're observing, times and dates, and let me know if you need me to do any kind of wellness check." That evening, Sarah sat at her desk long after the other teachers had left for the day. The building was quiet except for the distant sound of Mr. Patterson, the janitor, working his way through the hallways with his cleaning cart. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper from her desk drawer and began to write. Day 1. Monday. Lily Thompson refused to sit during entire school day, stood beside her seat during lessons, knelt during carpet time, stood during lunch. When questioned, stated she preferred standing. No visible signs of distress otherwise. Mother picked her up at dismissal. No apparent concern from parent. Day 2, Tuesday. Pattern continued. Lily remained standing during all seated activities. Other students beginning to notice and comment. Brief conversation during recess. Student became tense when questioned, insisted everything was fine. Same yellow dress as previous day. Day 3, Wednesday. Behavior unchanged. Student participating in lessons but absolutely avoiding sitting. Consulted with school nurse. Will reach out to parents tomorrow. Sarah folded the paper carefully and placed it in a folder labeled with Lily's name. Then she pulled out her laptop and composed an email to the address listed for Lily's parents. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to check in about Lily and see if everything is all right at home. I've noticed over the past few days that Lily has been hesitant to sit down during class time. She participates wonderfully in all activities and seems to be engaged with the lessons, but she consistently chooses to stand or kneel rather than sitting in her chair or on the floor. I wanted to reach out to see if you've noticed similar behavior at home, or if Lily has mentioned anything that might explain her discomfort with sitting. It's possible she simply has a preference, but I want to make sure there isn't an underlying issue that needs addressing, such as discomfort or pain. Would you be available for a brief phone call or meeting this week? I'd love to touch base and make sure Lily has everything she needs to be comfortable and successful in the classroom. Thank you for your time and attention to this matter. Warm regards, Sarah Mitchell, kindergarten teacher, Room 12. She read through the email 3 times, adjusting the wording to ensure it expressed concern without sounding alarmist. The last thing she wanted was to panic parents over what might be nothing more than a childhood phase. But her instincts, honed over nearly a decade of working with young children, told her this was something more. She hit send and closed her laptop, gathering her belongings to head home. As she locked her classroom door and walked through the dimly lit hallways toward the parking lot, she couldn't stop thinking about Lily standing beside that chair, her small body so carefully positioned to avoid the one thing that every other child did without thinking. Thursday morning brought sunshine and warmer temperatures, the kind of day that made children extra energetic and teachers extra tired. Sarah checked her email first thing after arriving at school, hoping for a response from Lily's parents. Nothing yet. She refreshed the page twice more before accepting that she'd have to wait. When Lily arrived that morning, Sarah noticed immediately that something was different. The girl moved more slowly through the classroom door, her usual small smile absent, replaced by a carefully blank expression. The yellow dress had been exchanged for blue jeans and a long-sleeved pink shirt, despite the warming weather, and she clutched her backpack straps with both hands, as if the bag were the only thing keeping her anchored. "Good morning, Lily," Sarah greeted her warmly, searching the girl's face for any clue about what might be happening. "Morning," Lily mumbled, not quite meeting her teacher's eyes. She moved to her table with the same deliberate care she'd shown all week, set down her backpack, and assumed her now familiar standing position beside the chair. The morning progressed through its usual routine. A Attendance was taken, the calendar was updated, and the students moved through their literacy stations. Sarah rotated between groups, helping with letter recognition here, sounding out words there, praising effort and offering encouragement. But her attention kept drifting back to Lily, who stood at her table working through a worksheet with her characteristic focus, though today there was something else in her posture, a stiffness that seemed more pronounced than before. During their mid-morning bathroom break, Sarah asked her teaching assistant, Mrs. Chen, to supervise the class while she made a quick call to the front office. She needed to check if there had been any phone calls from the Thompsons. "Nothing yet," the secretary informed her. "Want me to try calling them?" "Let me give them until end of day to respond to my email," Sarah decided. "If I don't hear back by 3 o'clock, then yes, please try calling." When she returned to the classroom, the students were settling back into their seats for math time. Sarah distributed small bags of counting bears to each table, colorful plastic toys that made learning addition and subtraction more engaging. The children dove into the activity with enthusiasm, sorting their bears by color and counting them into groups. Sarah was working with Marcus's table, helping him understand the concept of one more, when she heard a small gasp from across the room. She looked up just in time to see Lily swaying slightly on her feet, her face suddenly pale. Before Sarah could move, Lily's knees buckled and she began to fall toward the floor. Sarah moved faster than she'd thought possible, crossing the classroom in seconds and catching Lily before she could hit the ground hard. The girl didn't fall unconscious, but she was clearly disoriented, her eyes unfocused and her breathing quick and shallow. "Lily! Lily! Can you hear me?" Sarah asked urgently, lowering both of them carefully to the floor. She cradled Lily against her chest, feeling how small and fragile the child was. "Someone get Mrs. Chen, now!" Emma jumped up from her seat and ran to the door, calling for the teaching assistant who had stepped into the hallway. The other children had gone silent, their counting bears forgotten as they watched with wide eyes. Lily blinked several times, her focus gradually returning. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "I'm okay, Miss Mitchell. I just got dizzy." "When's the last time you had something to drink? Or ate?" Sarah asked, still holding the girl gently. She felt Lily try to pull away to sit up on her own and noticed the sharp intake of breath, the way the child's entire body tensed at the movement. "I had breakfast," Lily said, but there was something evasive in her tone. "I'm okay. Can I stand up?" Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, took one look at the situation, and immediately moved to help. "What happened?" "She got dizzy and almost fell," Sarah explained. "Lily, I'm going to help you up very slowly. Tell me if anything hurts, okay?" The girl nodded, and together Sarah and Mrs. Chen carefully helped her to her feet. As they did, Sarah had to adjust her grip on Lily's arms, and in doing so she felt the child flinch. The movement was small but unmistakable. Sarah's trained fingers had brushed against Lily's lower back through the pink shirt, and the girl had reacted as if touched by something painful. Sarah's heart rate kicked up. She kept her expression calm and her voice gentle, not wanting to frighten Lily or alert the watching students that something might be seriously wrong. "Mrs. Chen, can you take over the math lesson?" Sarah asked quietly. "I'm going to take Lily to see Mrs. Henderson." The teaching assistant nodded, immediately moving to gather the children's attention back to their counting bears. Sarah guided Lily toward the door with a gentle hand on her shoulder, specifically her shoulder, nowhere near where the flinch had occurred. They walked slowly down the hallway, Lily's footsteps uncertain beside Sarah's steady pace. The girl had wrapped her arms around herself, hugging her own middle as if trying to hold something in or protect something precious. "Lily, I felt you flinch when I touched your back," Sarah said softly as they walked. "Does something hurt there?" "No," Lily said quickly. Too quickly. "I'm just ticklish." They reached the nurse's office, a small room decorated with cheerful posters about hand-washing and healthy eating. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her computer as they entered, her experienced eyes immediately assessing the situation. "What do we have here?" she asked, her voice warm and professional. "Lily got dizzy and nearly fell in class," Sarah explained. "I helped her up and she flinched when I touched her lower back." Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted subtly, a tightness appearing around her eyes that suggested she understood the implication. She stood and approached Lily with a kind smile. "Well, let's make sure you're okay, sweetheart. Can you sit on the examination table for me?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Sarah watched Lily's face carefully, saw the girl's eyes dart between the nurse and the teacher, saw the calculation happening behind those young eyes as she weighed her options. "I'd rather stand," Lily said finally. "Lily, Mrs. Henderson needs to check you over," Sarah said gently. "Just for a few minutes. Can you be brave for us?" Lily looked at the examination table as if it were a torture device. Her small hands clenched into fists at her sides, and Sarah could see her breathing quicken. But slowly, with visible reluctance, the girl approached the table. Mrs. Henderson helped her climb up, and then it happened. As Lily tried to settle onto the padded surface, she gasped audibly and immediately pushed herself forward, so she was barely perched on the edge, most of her weight on her feet rather than sitting properly. "Does it hurt to sit, Lily?" Mrs. Henderson asked directly, her tone gentle but brooking no evasion. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, and she bit her lower lip hard enough that Sarah worried she might break the skin. The girl nodded just once, a tiny movement that confirmed what they'd both begun to suspect. "Okay, honey. That's okay. You don't have to sit." Mrs. Henderson pulled a rolling stool over and positioned it so she was at eye level with Lily. "Can you tell me where it hurts?" Lily shook her head, the tears now spilling down her cheeks. "I'm not supposed to tell," she whispered so quietly that Sarah had to lean forward to hear it. The words sent ice through Sarah's veins. Not supposed to tell. That phrase had a weight to it, a darkness that spoke of secrets and shame, and things hidden from daylight. Mrs. Henderson caught Sarah's eye and gave a small nod toward the door. Sarah understood. The nurse needed to do an examination, and it might be easier without an audience. "Lily, I'm going to step outside for just a minute," Sarah said, moving toward the door. "But I'll be right out there in the hallway if you need me. Mrs. Henderson is going to make sure you're okay. Is that all right?" Lily nodded, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. Sarah stepped into the hallway and closed the door most of the way, leaving it open just a crack. She could hear Mrs. Henderson's soothing voice inside, speaking in low, calm tones that she couldn't quite make out. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:47 a.m. She'd been out of her classroom for nearly 15 minutes. Mrs. Chen was capable, but Sarah knew she needed to get back soon. The door opened and Mrs. Henderson emerged, her face carefully composed but her eyes troubled. She pulled the door closed behind her and spoke in a low voice. "There are marks on her lower back and upper thighs," she said without preamble. "Linear marks. Like she's been lying on something rough or uneven for extended periods. Some areas show irritation and what might be early signs of infection. I asked her to lift her shirt just a few inches, and she was terrified, Sarah, absolutely terrified. But she did it, and I saw enough." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Abuse? I don't know yet," Mrs. Henderson said carefully. "The marks don't look like typical abuse patterns, no hand shapes, no belt marks. But something is definitely wrong. The pattern is strange, almost like, I don't know, like bed sores, but not quite. She's young and mobile, so bed sores don't make sense. But there's definitely trauma to the tissue." "She said she wasn't supposed to tell," Sarah whispered. Mrs. Henderson nodded grimly. "I know. which means someone told her to keep quiet about whatever is causing this. Sarah, we need to follow protocol here. I'm required to report this. I know, Sarah said, her mind already racing ahead to the implications. Child Protective Services would become involved. There would be investigations. The family would be scrutinized. And if this was a misunderstanding, if there was an innocent explanation, the Thompsons would still be put through an invasive, frightening process. But if it wasn't a misunderstanding, if Lily was being hurt, then every moment of hesitation was another moment of potential harm. Make the call, Sarah said firmly. I'll contact the parents right now and ask them to come in. We need to talk to them before this goes any further. Mrs. Henderson nodded and went back into her office where Lily waited. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed the number listed for Mrs. Thompson. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Hello, this is Sarah Mitchell, Lily's teacher at Jefferson Elementary. I need you to call me back immediately regarding an urgent matter concerning Lily. Please call the school office at your earliest convenience. She left the office number and hung up, then immediately dialed Mr. Thompson's number. Same result. Voicemail. Frustration burned in her chest. Where were these people? Why weren't they responding? She returned to her classroom to find Mrs. Chen managing the situation admirably, though several students immediately asked where Lily was and if she was okay. Sarah assured them their classmate was fine and being taken care of, then pulled Mrs. Chen aside to quietly explain that Lily would be in the nurse's office for a while and that there might be some unusual activity in the building soon. Mrs. Chen, a grandmother herself with decades of experience in schools, understood immediately. You do what you need to do, she said quietly. I'll keep things running here. The rest of the morning crawled by. Sarah taught her lessons by rote, her mind only half present as she led students through reading time and then early lunch. She checked her phone constantly, hoping for a return call from the Thompsons. Nothing came. At noon, Mrs. Henderson appeared at her classroom door. Sarah stepped into the hallway to speak with her. I've made the report, the nurse said quietly. CPS is sending someone this afternoon. And I think you should know. I did a more thorough examination with Lily's permission. The marks extend further than I initially thought. Her entire lower back and buttocks area show signs of repeated trauma. Something has been pressing into her skin with enough force and for enough duration to cause significant tissue damage. But what could cause that? Sarah asked, trying to imagine what could create such an injury pattern. I honestly don't know, Mrs. Henderson admitted. But whatever it is, it's been happening for a while. Some of these marks are older, partially healed. Some are fresh. This is ongoing, Sarah. At 1:30 p.m., a woman in a dark blazer and carrying a professional-looking briefcase appeared in the main office. Sarah was called down to meet with her, Mrs. Henderson, and the school principal, Mr. Davies. The woman introduced herself as Karen Wells from Child Protective Services. Tell me everything, she said, pulling out a notepad. Sarah recounted the week's observations, the consistent refusal to sit, the incident that morning, the flinch, Lily's statement about not being supposed to tell. Mrs. Henderson added her medical observations. Mr. Davies provided Lily's file with her parents' contact information and emergency numbers. Have the parents been contacted? Ms. Wells asked. Multiple times, Mr. Davies confirmed. No response yet. We've left urgent messages. I need to speak with Lily alone, Ms. Wells said, standing. Then I'll need to see these marks myself. She spent 45 minutes with Lily in a private conference room. Sarah waited outside the entire time, pacing the hallway like an expectant father in old movies. She'd sent a text to Mrs. Chen saying she'd be out for the rest of the day, asking her to handle dismissal. When Ms. Wells finally emerged, her expression was troubled. The child is terrified, she reported to the assembled adults. She's clearly been told not to discuss this with anyone, but I did get her to admit that sitting hurts and that it's been hurting for a long time. She wouldn't tell me what caused it or who told her to stay quiet, but there's definitely something going on in that home. What happens now? Sarah asked. I need to make contact with the parents immediately, Ms. Wells said. If I can't reach them by phone in the next hour, I'll go to their home address. We need to see the living environment and speak with them directly. In the meantime, Lily will stay here at school, where she's safe. Another hour passed. Sarah returned to her classroom to help Mrs. Chen with the end-of-day chaos of backpacks and papers and children being released to their various guardians. She watched the door, expecting Lily's mother to appear at any moment, but dismissal came and went with no sign of Mrs. Thompson. At 3:45 p.m., Sarah's phone finally rang with a number she didn't recognize. Hello. Is this Ms. Mitchell? This is Jennifer Thompson, Lily's mother. I just got your messages. What's going on? Is Lily all right? Relief and apprehension flooded through Sarah in equal measure. Mrs. Thompson, thank you for calling back. I need you and your husband to come to the school right away. There's a situation we need to discuss regarding Lily. There was a pause on the line. What kind of situation? You're scaring me. I'd rather discuss this in person, Mrs. Thompson. How soon can you get here? I'm just finishing my shift at the hospital. I can be there in 20 minutes. My husband is at work about an hour away. What is this about? Sarah glanced down the hallway to where Mr. Davies stood, talking with Ms. Wells. 20 minutes is fine. Come to the main office when you arrive. We'll explain everything. She hung up and went to inform the others. Ms. Wells nodded with satisfaction. Good. I want to observe this conversation. I need to assess their reaction and determine if there's immediate danger to the child. Jennifer Thompson arrived in 19 minutes, still wearing her hospital scrubs, her face flushed from hurrying. Sarah met her in the office where Mr. Davies, Mrs. Henderson, and Ms. Wells waited. When Mrs. Thompson saw the assembled group, her face went pale. Where's Lily? What happened? Lily is safe, Mr. Davies assured her. She's in the library with one of our staff members. Please, have a seat. Mrs. Thompson sat on the edge of the offered chair, her hands twisting together in her lap. Someone tell me what's going on. Sarah took a breath and began carefully, trying to balance honesty with sensitivity. Mrs. Thompson, over the past week I've noticed that Lily has been refusing to sit down in class. At first, I thought it was just a quirk or a phase, but it became clear that she was actively avoiding sitting because it caused her pain or discomfort. Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. Sarah continued. This morning Lily became dizzy and nearly fell. When I helped her up, she flinched when I touched her lower back. We brought her to the nurse, and during an examination, we discovered marks on her back and upper thighs that indicate some kind of repeated physical trauma. Trauma? Mrs. Thompson's voice cracked on the word. What are you saying? You think someone hurt her? You think I... Her eyes suddenly landed on Miss Wells, whose professional demeanor clearly marked her as someone official. Oh my God! You called child services? Mrs. Thompson, we're required by law to report when we observe signs of potential abuse or neglect, Mr. Davies said calmly. We're not accusing anyone of anything. We're trying to understand what's causing these injuries and make sure Lily is safe. Can I see my daughter? Mrs. Thompson asked, her voice rising. I need to see her right now. In a moment, Ms. Wells said, her tone firm but not unkind. First, I need to ask you some questions. Do you have any knowledge of what might be causing marks on your daughter's lower back and legs? Has she complained of pain? Have you noticed her avoiding sitting? Mrs. Thompson's face crumbled. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, and she covered her mouth with one trembling hand. For a long moment, she couldn't speak, just sat there crying while the adults around her waited. Finally, she lowered her hand and spoke in a hoarse whisper. I knew something was wrong. I knew it, but I was so afraid. We've been trying to keep it together, trying to not let anyone know how bad things have gotten. How bad what has gotten? Ms. Wells asked, leaning forward. Mrs. Thompson wiped at her eyes, smearing mascara across her cheeks. We lost our housing 6 months ago, medical bills from when my husband broke his leg. Then my hours got cut at the hospital and we couldn't keep up with rent. We've been staying with my sister, but she only has a 2-bedroom apartment and her own 3 kids. It's cramped and temporary, and we've been trying so hard to save enough to get our own place again. Sarah exchanged glances with Mrs. Henderson. This wasn't the confession they'd expected. What does that have to do with Lily's injuries? Miss Wells pressed. The sleeping arrangements, Mrs. Thompson said miserably. There's not enough space, not enough beds. The kids share rooms, share beds. Lily has been sleeping on... She stopped, took a shuddering breath. There's an old pull-out couch in the living room. It's ancient, probably 20 years old. The mattress is falling apart. There are springs poking through the fabric, and we tried to cover them with blankets, but they still come through. And there's mold. The couch was stored in my sister's basement for years before we needed it, and it got damp down there. We've been airing it out, trying to clean it, but... The confession hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt her heart clench as the pieces suddenly fell into horrifying place. Not abuse, not intentional harm, but suffering nonetheless caused by desperation and poverty, and the kind of impossible choices that no family should have to make. Your daughter has been sleeping on a moldy mattress with exposed springs, Ms. Wells asked, her voice carefully neutral but her pen moving rapidly across her notepad. Mrs. Thompson nodded, unable to meet anyone's eyes. We didn't have a choice. We can't afford a new mattress. We can barely afford food some weeks. I work as many shifts as they'll give me, and my husband took a second job doing deliveries at night after his regular construction work. We're trying so hard to get back on our feet, but everything costs so much and we had no savings left after the medical bills and losing the apartment and... Her voice broke entirely, dissolving into sobs. Sarah felt her own eyes burning with tears. This wasn't a story of malice. This was a story of a system that had failed a family, of circumstances that had spiraled beyond their control, of parents working themselves to exhaustion and still unable to provide basic safety for their child. Mrs. Henderson moved quietly to a small refrigerator in the corner of the office and pulled out a bottle of water, which she offered to Mrs. Thompson. The woman took it with shaking hands, managing to whisper a thank you between sobs. Mrs. Thompson, Ms. Wells said after giving her a moment to compose herself slightly, I need to ask you directly. Did you or your husband or anyone else intentionally harm Lily? Did anyone tell her to keep quiet about her injuries? No. Mrs. Thompson looked up sharply, her eyes red and swollen. Never. We would never hurt her. But I did tell her not to complain about the sleeping situation. I told her we were doing the best we could and that she needed to be brave and not make things harder for her aunt, who was already doing us such a huge favor. Oh God, I told my baby to just deal with being hurt because I was too ashamed to admit we couldn't even provide her with a safe bed. She dissolved into fresh tears, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief and shame. Sarah felt her professional composure cracking. She'd been teaching long enough to know that most parents were doing their absolute best with the resources and knowledge they had. She'd seen genuine abuse and she'd seen poverty, and they weren't always the same thing. This family wasn't cruel. They were drowning. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. Miss Wells, what happens now? The CPS worker was quiet for a long moment, studying Mrs. Thompson with an expression that was harder to read than Sarah would have liked. Finally, she spoke. I need to see the living conditions. I need to verify what you're telling me and assess whether the home is safe for Lily to return to tonight. I also need to speak with your sister and your husband. But Mrs. Thompson, I want you to understand something. Keeping a child in conditions that are causing physical harm, even if those conditions are due to financial hardship, is still neglect under the law. My job is to determine what's in Lily's best interest. Mrs. Thompson's face went even paler, if that was possible. Are you going to take her from me? I'm not making that determination right now, Ms. Wells said. But we need to ensure she has a safe place to sleep tonight. Can you commit to that? I don't know how, Mrs. Thompson admitted, her voice breaking. We don't have money for a new mattress. We've been saving, but we're still weeks away from having enough for first and last month's rent on a new apartment. I don't know what to do. Sarah spoke up before she could stop herself. What if there was another option? What if we could help find a temporary solution? Ms. Wells turned to her with a raised eyebrow. Miss Mitchell, this isn't your responsibility. Maybe not officially, Sarah said, but this is one of my students. One of my kids. And I can't just stand here knowing she's going to go back to sleeping on something that's literally hurting her when there might be things we can do. Mr. Davies was nodding slowly. There are community resources, churches that help with furniture donations. The teachers' union has an emergency fund for families in crisis. We could make some calls. I can reach out to the hospital staff, Mrs. Henderson added. We've done fundraisers before for colleagues facing hardship. This qualifies. Mrs. Thompson was staring at them with an expression of disbelief. You would do that? You don't even know us. We know Lily, Sarah said simply, and we know she deserves to be safe. That's enough. Ms. Wells held up a hand. I appreciate the impulse to help, but I still need to do my job. Mrs. Thompson, I need you to take me to where you're staying. I need to see the conditions and speak with your sister. Lily can stay here at the school until we've completed the assessment. Mrs. Thompson nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Okay. Yes. Whatever you need to do. But please, please don't take her from me. I know I messed up. I know I should have found some solution sooner. But I love my daughter. She's everything to me. Let's take this one step at a time, Ms. Wells said, not unkindly. She stood, gathering her materials. Mr. Davies, can you have someone stay with Lily until we return? Of course, the principal said. Mrs. Chen can stay with her as long as needed. Sarah watched as Mrs. Thompson and Ms. Wells left the office together. The mother's shoulders slumped in defeat and exhaustion. As soon as they were gone, Sarah turned to the others. We need to move fast, she said with urgency. If CPS determines that the home isn't safe, Lily could end up in foster care tonight. But if we can show them there's a plan in place, a support system, they might be more willing to keep the family together. Agreed, Mr. Davies said, already pulling out his phone. Mrs. Henderson, start making calls to the hospital. I'll contact the union and see what emergency funds we can access. Sarah, you know the community better than anyone. Who else might be able to help? Sarah's mind was already racing through possibilities. There's a furniture bank about 20 minutes from here. They provide beds and other essentials to families in need. And Pastor Williams at the community church, they have a benevolence fund specifically for situations like this. Let me make some calls. For the next hour, the three of them worked their phones like campaign managers before an election. Sarah spoke with the furniture bank and learned they had 2 twin mattresses available and could deliver them that very evening if needed. Pastor Williams agreed to contribute to the cost and mentioned that his congregation included a family who owned a cleaning company. They could help with the mold situation in the apartment. Mrs. Henderson connected with 3 colleagues at the hospital who immediately pledged to contribute to a fund for the Thompson family. Within 30 minutes, they had over $400 committed, enough to cover a new mattress and some basic bedding. Mr. Davies worked his network through the school district and discovered there was indeed an emergency fund available that could provide up to $500 to families of enrolled students facing crisis situations. The paperwork could be expedited and funds released within 48 hours. By the time Miss Wells returned with Mrs. Thompson an hour and a half later, they had a plan assembled. Sarah met them in the office, where Mrs. Thompson looked emotionally wrung out, and Miss Wells appeared thoughtful. "I've seen the living conditions," Miss Wells announced to the group. Mrs. Thompson was truthful in her description. "The couch is in deplorable condition, and the sleeping arrangements are definitely inadequate. However, I did not observe signs of general neglect otherwise. The children appear well fed, clean, and the home, while crowded, is reasonably maintained. The sister is cooperative and concerned. The husband is on his way." "So what's your determination?" Mr. Davies asked. Ms. Wells pulled out her paperwork and clicked her pen. "Normally, I would recommend removal until the housing situation could be remedied. However, given the cooperation of the family and the lack of other concerning factors, I'm willing to allow Lily to remain in the home under the following conditions. 1. The couch must be removed from use immediately tonight. 2. Lily must have access to a safe, clean sleeping surface. 3. I will conduct a follow-up visit within 72 hours to verify compliance. And 4. The family must engage with social services to connect with housing assistance programs." "We can meet all those conditions," Sarah said quickly before anyone else could speak. "The community is stepping up. We have mattresses being donated, funds raised to help with costs, and people ready to assist with the transition." Mrs. Thompson was crying again, but this time with something that looked like relief mixed with disbelief. "I can't believe you're all doing this. We're strangers to you." "You're part of our school community," Mr. Davies said warmly, "and that means you're not alone." A thought occurred to Sarah. "Mrs. Thompson, where will Lily sleep tonight? I mean, if the couch has to go immediately." "My sister says the kids can double up in one room and Lily can have a bed in the other room, at least until the new mattress arrives," Mrs. Thompson explained. "It'll be tight, but they'll manage." "The furniture bank can deliver tomorrow afternoon," Sarah added. "I spoke with them earlier. They'll bring 2 twin mattresses, box springs, and frames. No cost to you." Ms. Wells nodded with approval. "That's acceptable. I'll note this in my report. Mrs. Thompson, I want to be clear. This is a warning. If I come back in 3 days and find that Lily is still in unsafe conditions, I will have no choice but to proceed with removal. Do you understand?" "Yes," Mrs. Thompson said emphatically. "Yes, I understand." "Thank you. Thank you all so much." "Can Lily come home with me tonight?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her voice small and hopeful. "Yes," Ms. Wells said. "But first I'd like to speak with her one more time, and I think she should be checked by a doctor to assess the injuries and make sure there's no infection that needs treatment." "I can arrange for an urgent care visit," Mrs. Henderson offered. "There's a clinic 3 blocks from here that takes walk-ins." Another hour passed as arrangements were finalized. Lily was brought from the library where she'd been waiting with Mrs. Chen, playing educational games and being mercifully unaware of the intense discussions happening about her future. When she saw her mother, she ran across the office and threw herself into Mrs. Thompson's arms. "Mama, I missed you." Mrs. Thompson held her daughter tight, tears streaming down her face as she buried her face in Lily's curly hair. "I missed you too, baby. I missed you so much. And I'm so sorry." Sarah watched the reunion with her own eyes burning. This was why she'd become a teacher. Not for the lesson plans or the test scores, but for moments like this, when she could make a real difference in a child's life beyond the classroom walls. Ms. Wells spoke gently to Lily, explaining that she needed to see a doctor to make sure the OEs on her back were healing properly. Lily nodded solemnly, holding her mother's hand. "Will it hurt?" the girl asked. "The doctor will be very gentle," Mrs. Henderson assured her. "And you're being so brave, Lily. So very brave." The group made their way to the urgent care clinic, a small procession of concerned adults surrounding one small girl. Sarah went along, unable to simply go home while this was still unresolved. The clinic doctor, a kind older man named Dr. Patel, examined Lily thoroughly while her mother held her hand. His findings confirmed what Mrs. Henderson had observed: linear pressure marks consistent with lying on a rough surface, some areas showing early signs of infection that required antibiotic cream, and overall irritation that would need time and proper rest to heal. "These will resolve with proper care," Dr. Patel told Mrs. Thompson. "Keep the area clean, apply this cream twice daily, and most importantly, make sure she has a proper sleeping surface. The skin needs time to heal without continued trauma." He wrote out prescriptions and gave detailed care instructions. As they left the clinic, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah walked Mrs. Thompson and Lily to their car, an older sedan that had definitely seen better days. "I don't know how to thank you," Mrs. Thompson said, strapping Lily into her booster seat. You could have assumed the worst about us. You could have just called CPS and walked away." "You're a good mother facing impossible circumstances," Sarah said. "That's not the same as being a bad parent, and Lily is lucky to have you fighting for her." Mrs. Thompson wiped at her eyes. "I should have done something sooner. I should have asked for help." "It's hard to ask for help," Sarah acknowledged. "There's shame attached to struggling financially, and our society doesn't make it easy to admit you're drowning. But you're asking now. You're accepting help now." "That takes courage," Lily's small voice came from the back seat. "Miss Mitchell, will I get to sit in my chair tomorrow?" The question was so innocent, so full of hope, that Sarah had to swallow hard before answering. "You know what, Lily? Let's give your back a few more days to feel better, okay? You can stand if you need to. Whatever makes you comfortable. All that matters is that you're there with us, learning and growing. The rest we can figure out." Lily smiled, that beautiful, uncomplicated smile of a child who trusted the adults in her life to make things right. "Okay. I love school, Miss Mitchell." "I love having you in my class, sweetheart." Sarah stood in the parking lot and watched them drive away, her hand raised in a wave that Lily enthusiastically returned through the window. When the car disappeared around the corner, she finally let herself sag against her own vehicle, the emotional exhaustion of the day hitting her all at once. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Davies. "Pastor Williams's cleaning crew can be at the apartment Saturday morning. Hospital fund now at $645. Union-approved emergency assistance. $500 check will be ready tomorrow. You did good today, Sarah." She typed back a quick thank you and sat in her car for a long moment before starting the engine. The streetlights were beginning to flicker on, signaling the end of a day that had felt approximately 3 weeks long. As she drove home, her mind kept replaying moments from the past week, Lily standing beside that chair, the fear in the girl's eyes when asked about sitting, Mrs. Thompson's devastating confession about telling her daughter to be brave and stay quiet. How many other children were suffering in silence? How many families were one emergency away from crisis? How many parents were working themselves to exhaustion and still falling short because the math just didn't add up anymore? The next morning, Friday, Sarah arrived at school early. She'd spent half the night thinking about Lily and the other half researching community resources for families facing housing insecurity. She'd compiled a list of organizations, programs, and support services that she planned to share with Mr. Davies for the school's Family Resource Board. When her students filed in that morning, she scanned each face with perhaps a bit more attention than usual. Marcus with his dinosaur pencil case. Did his family have what they needed? Emma carefully placing her lunchbox. Was there always food in that lunchbox? Or were there days when it was empty? Jaden with his enthusiastic waves. Did he have a safe place to sleep? And then Lily appeared in the doorway, and Sarah's heart lifted. The girl was wearing a different dress today, purple with white flowers, and she carried her backpack with a lighter step than she'd had all week. When she saw Sarah, she smiled, a real smile that actually reached her eyes. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell." "Good morning, Lily. How are you feeling today?" "My back still hurts a little, but Mama put special medicine on it, and guess what? I get a new bed tomorrow, a whole new bed just for me." The excitement in her voice was infectious. Several other students overheard and clustered around, asking questions about new beds and why Lily was getting one. Sarah gently redirected them to their morning tasks while Lily settled at her table. Still standing, Sarah noticed, but with less of the desperate tension from earlier in the week. Mrs. Chen arrived with coffee for both of them, taking one look at Sarah's face and correctly interpreting that the previous day had been intense. "Everything work out with your student?" "It's working out," Sarah said carefully, not wanting to breach confidentiality. But it was a close call, a really close call. Throughout the morning, Sarah found herself watching Lily with a mix of relief and residual anxiety. The girl participated in lessons, laughed at a silly joke during story time, and even attempted to sit briefly during art class before standing again with a small wince. But there was a difference in her demeanor. The fear was gone, replaced by something that looked like hope. At lunch, Lily stood at her usual spot by the table, but today she was joined by Emma and Marcus, who had decided standing looked fun and wanted to try it too. Sarah watched from her monitoring position as the three children ate their lunches, standing up, chatting about their favorite cartoons and whether dinosaurs could beat superheroes in a fight. "Kids are resilient," Mrs. Chen remarked, following Sarah's gaze. "They adapt to things that would break adults." "They shouldn't have to adapt to so much," Sarah replied quietly. "They should just get to be kids." After lunch, Mr. Davies appeared at her classroom door and gestured for her to step into the hallway. His expression was pleased. "I wanted to give you an update," he said. "The furniture bank confirmed delivery for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pastor Williams arranged for his cleaning team to deep clean the apartment starting at 9 a.m. tomorrow. The hospital fund has grown to over $800, and several staff members have donated children's bedding, pillows, and even some clothes in Lily's size. Ms. Wells called this morning to say she's impressed with the community response and will note it favorably in her report." Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes again. "That's wonderful. Have you heard from Mrs. Thompson?" "She called about an hour ago, crying so hard I could barely understand her at first, but they were happy tears. Her husband's employer heard about the situation and is advancing him a week's pay to help cover immediate expenses. And Mrs. Thompson's supervisor at the hospital is working to restore some of her lost hours. Things are coming together. What about long-term? They still need to find affordable housing. Ms. Wells is connecting them with a housing assistance program that helps families with security deposits and rental assistance. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a start. The point is, Sarah, what could have resulted in a family being torn apart is instead resulting in a community wrapping around them. That's because you paid attention. You noticed something was wrong and you pushed until you found answers. Sarah shook her head. "I almost didn't. I almost convinced myself it was just a kid being quirky. If she hadn't fallen that day, if I hadn't touched her back at just that moment. But you did notice, and you did act. That's what matters." The weekend passed with text updates from various people involved in the situation. Mrs. Henderson sent a photo on Saturday afternoon of a smiling Lily lying on her new mattress, surrounded by colorful bedding donated by hospital staff. The caption read, "One happy girl with a safe place to sleep." Pastor Williams reported that the cleaning crew had successfully removed and disposed of the old couch, treated the mold situation, and the apartment was now in much better condition. Several church families had donated additional furniture, including a small bookshelf and a lamp for Lily's temporary bedroom space. Ms. Wells sent a professional email to Mr. Davies, copied to Sarah, stating that her follow-up visit showed significant improvement in the living conditions and that the family was in compliance with all requirements. The case would remain open for monitoring, but removal was no longer being considered. Monday morning arrived with rain pattering against the classroom windows, the kind of gentle spring rain that made everything smell fresh and new. Sarah stood at her door, greeting students as always, but today she felt a nervous anticipation that had nothing to do with lesson plans. When Lily appeared, walking beside her mother, who had taken time off work to personally drop her daughter at school, Sarah's worry dissolved. The girl practically skipped into the classroom, her curly hair bouncing, her smile stretching ear to ear. "Miss Mitchell, look!" Lily spun around to show off her backpack. "Mama got me a new one, and I have new pencils. And guess what? I slept in my new bed, and it was so soft, and I didn't hurt at all when I woke up." Mrs. Thompson stood in the doorway looking tired but infinitely lighter than she had the previous week. "Miss Mitchell, could I speak with you for just a moment?" "Of course." Sarah stepped into the hallway with her while Lily went to join her classmates at the tables. Mrs. Thompson took a deep breath. "I wanted to thank you properly, not just for the immediate help, but for seeing my daughter, for not giving up when something seemed off. You probably saved my family from being destroyed, and I don't know if I can ever really express what that means to me." "You don't have to thank me," Sarah said. "I was just doing my job." "No," Mrs. Thompson said firmly. "Your job is to teach her reading and math. What you did went way beyond that. You cared enough to look deeper. You fought for her, and then you fought for us as a family instead of assuming the worst." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and pressed it into Sarah's hand. "Lily wanted to make this for you." Sarah unfolded the paper to find a crayon drawing of two stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. A large red heart floated above them, and at the top, in wobbly letters, "Miss Mitchell is the best techer. Love, Lily." The misspellings made it even more precious. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "She spent all day yesterday working on it," Mrs. Thompson said softly. "She wanted to make sure you knew how much you helped her." "I'll treasure this," Sarah managed to say. "How are things going with the housing assistance?" "We have an appointment with the program coordinator on Wednesday. They think they can help us get into a place by the end of next month. It's not immediate, but knowing there's a plan, knowing we're moving towards something better, it makes such a difference. And my sister has been amazing, really working with us to make the current situation as comfortable as possible while we save and wait." They talked for a few more minutes before Mrs. Thompson had to leave for her shift at the hospital. Sarah returned to her classroom to find Lily actually sitting, in her chair at the blue table, working on a coloring page with Marcus and Emma on either side of her. Sarah's heart swelled. Such a simple thing. A child sitting in a chair. Something every other student did without thought every single day. But for Lily, this was a victory. This was healing. This was safety. The morning progressed through its usual routines. The students practiced writing their letters, learned about plant growth, and sang songs about the days of the week. During circle time, Lily sat cross-legged on the carpet with the others, her face showing only minor discomfort that she worked through with determination. At recess, Sarah stood in her monitoring position and watched Lily run across the playground with a group of girls, all of them shrieking with laughter as they chased each other in some complicated game whose rules only they understood. The joy on Lily's face was unfiltered and pure. Mrs. Henderson joined Sarah at the playground's edge. "She's doing better. So much better," Sarah agreed. "I keep thinking about how close we came to this, going a completely different direction." "But it didn't," Mrs. Henderson pointed out, "because people cared enough to look beyond the surface. That's not common, Sarah. A lot of teachers would have just sent her to the office for being disruptive. A lot of nurses would have made the report and walked away. But you, Mr. Davies, me, Pastor Williams, the hospital staff, we all chose to dig deeper and help instead of judge. That made all the difference." "I wish every story ended this way," Sarah said quietly. "They don't," Mrs. Henderson acknowledged. "Sometimes there are no happy endings. Sometimes the system fails kids despite everyone's best efforts. But this one time, we got it right. We have to celebrate that and use it as motivation to keep paying attention. Keep fighting for the ones who can't fight for themselves." The weeks that followed brought gradual improvements. Lily's injuries healed completely, the antibiotic cream doing its job to prevent infection, while the new sleeping arrangements gave her body time to repair. Her ability to sit without discomfort returned slowly but steadily. By the end of the second week, she was sitting for entire lessons without issue, her small body finally free from the constant pain that had defined her days. Sarah documented the progress in Lily's file, noting not just the physical healing but the emotional transformation. The wariness that had shadowed the girl's eyes was gone, replaced by the natural curiosity and enthusiasm appropriate for a 5-year-old. She participated more actively in class, raised her hand more often, and even volunteered to be line leader, something she'd never done before. The Thompson family's situation improved incrementally. Mrs. Thompson's hours at the hospital were restored to full time. Her husband's construction company gave him a small raise after learning about their circumstances. The emergency funds from the school and hospital covered not just the immediate crisis, but also helped them catch up on some lingering debt that had been hanging over them. 6 weeks after that frightening Thursday when Lily had nearly fallen, Sarah received an email from Mrs. Thompson with the subject line, "Good news." The family had been approved for a subsidized apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. They would be moving in 2 weeks. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, one for the parents, one for Lily. No more couch in a sister's living room, no more cramped temporary arrangements. An actual home. Sarah showed the email to Mr. Davies, who smiled with genuine pleasure. "This is what it's all about," he said. "This is why we do what we do." The moving day arrived on a Saturday, and Sarah found herself joining a group of volunteers from the school and church who showed up to help the family transition to their new place. It was a modest apartment on the second floor of an older but well-maintained building, with windows that let in afternoon sunlight and a small balcony where someone had left a potted plant from the previous tenant. Lily ran through the empty rooms with unbridled excitement, claiming the smaller bedroom as her own and immediately planning where her new bed would go, where she'd put her toys, where she'd do her homework. The joy radiating from her was palpable. "This is my room," she kept saying to anyone who would listen. "My very own room." Mrs. Thompson found Sarah in the kitchen where volunteers were unpacking donated dishes and pantry items. The woman pulled her into a tight hug, whispering, "Thank you," over and over, until Sarah's shirt was damp with her tears. "You gave us our life back," Mrs. Thompson said when she finally pulled away. "I don't know how to repay that." "You don't repay it," Sarah told her. "You pay it forward. Someday, when you're stable and secure, you help the next family that's struggling. That's how we build community." As the sun set that evening, Sarah stood on the apartment's small balcony with Mr. Davies and Pastor Williams, watching as inside the apartment, Lily showed other children from the building her new room. The girls' laughter floated out through the open windows, a sound of pure happiness that seemed to encapsulate everything they'd been working toward. "Do you ever wonder how many lilies we don't catch?" Pastor Williams asked quietly. "How many kids are suffering in silence because no one notices or no one acts?" "All the time," Sarah admitted. "It keeps me up at night." "Me too," Mr. Davies said. "But we can't save everyone. We can only do our best with the ones in front of us. And we definitely saved this one." The school year wound toward its end. Spring gave way to early summer, the days growing longer and warmer. In room 12, Sarah's kindergarten class prepared for their graduation ceremony, practicing the songs they would sing and the short speeches they would give about what they'd learned. On the day of the ceremony, parents filled the small auditorium, cameras ready to capture their children's moment of achievement. Sarah stood backstage with her students, adjusting caller after caller and reassuring nervous 5-year-olds that they would do great. Lily stood near the front of the line, wearing a white dress her mother had carefully ironed that morning. She clutched Sarah's hand and looked up at her teacher with wide eyes. "I'm scared, Miss Mitchell. What if I forget my words?" "You won't forget," Sarah assured her. "And even if you do, I'll be right there beside you. You've got this, sweetheart." The ceremony proceeded beautifully. Each child stood at the microphone and stated their name and what they wanted to be when they grew up. The answers ranged from astronaut to puppy to someone who makes ice cream, bringing chuckles from the audience. When it was Lily's turn, she walked confidently to the microphone, no longer the frightened child who had flinched at touch or refused to sit. She spoke clearly into the microphone. "My name is Lily Thompson. When I grow up, I want to be a teacher like Miss Mitchell, so I can help kids who are sad or scared or hurt. I want to make sure every kid has a safe place to be happy." The audience erupted in applause. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, not even trying to hide them. Mrs. Thompson was crying in the third row, her husband's arm around her shoulders. Even stoic, Mr. Davies was wiping at his eyes from his position by the stage curtain. After the ceremony, during the reception with cookies and juice boxes, family after family approached Sarah to thank her for her work with their children. But the conversation that stuck with her most was a quiet moment with Lily when the girl approached her away from the crowd. "Miss Mitchell, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, honey." Lily leaned in close and whispered, "I wasn't going to tell anyone about my bed hurting me. I thought I was being bad for complaining. But you noticed anyway. You saw that I needed help even when I couldn't say it. Thank you for seeing me." Sarah knelt down to Lily's level, taking both of her small hands. "Lily, I will always see you, and I hope you remember something important. It's never bad to ask for help when you're hurting. It's not complaining, it's being brave. And you, my dear girl, are one of the bravest people I've ever met." Lily threw her arms around Sarah's neck in a fierce hug. "I love you, Miss Mitchell. I love you too, sweetheart." As Sarah drove home that evening, the weight of the school year lifting from her shoulders, she found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. One observant moment, noticing a child who wouldn't sit. One decision to investigate instead of dismiss. One choice to fight for answers instead of accepting the surface explanation. Those small actions had cascaded into a complete transformation of a family's circumstances. But it hadn't just been her. It had been Mrs. Henderson's medical expertise and compassion, Mr. Davies's willingness to mobilize resources, Ms. Wells's balanced assessment that looked beyond the immediate facts to the underlying situation, Pastor Williams and his congregation's generosity, the hospital staff's quick response, the furniture bank's donation, the entire community coming together because one small girl needed help. That was the lesson, Sarah realized. No single person could fix every problem or save every child. But a community working together, paying attention to the quiet signals of suffering, choosing compassion over judgment, that could change everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Thompson. Lily wants to know if you can come to her birthday party next month. She's turning 6 and says it won't be a real party without her favorite teacher. Sarah smiled and typed back, "I wouldn't miss it for the world." She thought about Lily's journey, from a frightened child standing beside her chair, hiding marks beneath her clothes and carrying the weight of a secret she'd been told not to tell, to a confident, healed girl talking about becoming a teacher to help others. The transformation was remarkable, but it had been possible only because people had noticed, had cared, had acted. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would keep paying attention. She would keep looking beyond the obvious explanations. She would keep fighting for the children who couldn't fight for themselves, because somewhere out there was another Lily, another child suffering in silence. Another family drowning in circumstances beyond their control, and too proud or too frightened to ask for help. The story could have ended so differently. Lily could have been removed from her family, placed in foster care while her parents battled to prove they weren't abusive. The trauma of separation could have damaged the family bonds beyond repair. The shame and judgment could have pushed the Thompsons deeper into crisis. But because people chose to investigate with compassion, to support rather than condemn, to build up rather than tear down, a family had been preserved and strengthened. That night, before going to sleep, Sarah pinned Lily's crayon drawing to the bulletin board in her home office, right in the center where she would see it every day. The stick figures holding hands, the bright red heart, the misspelled words of gratitude. It was worth more than any award or recognition her school district could ever give her. This was why she taught. Not for the test scores or the curriculum benchmarks or the gold stars on completed assignments. She taught because every child deserved to be seen, to be heard, to be protected. She taught because sometimes the most important lessons happened outside the formal education structure. She taught because kids like Lily needed advocates who would notice when something was wrong and who wouldn't stop until they'd made it right. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah remained in contact with the Thompson family. She attended Lily's 6th birthday party, held in their apartment with its 2 bedrooms and afternoon sunlight. She watched as Lily flourished in 1st grade. Her confidence growing as her circumstances stabilized. She saw Mrs. Thompson volunteer to help other families at the school who were facing difficulties, paying forward the compassion that had been shown to them. And when the next school year began, Sarah stood at her classroom door on the first day with perhaps a bit more awareness of the silent struggles her students might be carrying. She noticed the boy who flinched when she raised her hand too quickly. She noticed the girl who always wore long sleeves even in warm weather. She noticed the child who devoured his breakfast as if he hadn't eaten since the previous school day. She noticed, and she acted, and she made sure that no child in her care would suffer in silence if she could help it. Years later, when people asked Sarah about her most memorable teaching moment, she never talked about the student who won the district spelling bee or the class that scored highest on standardized tests. She talked about Lily Thompson, the 5-year-old who wouldn't sit down, and how a community came together to transform potential tragedy into triumph. The story served as a reminder that teachers save lives not just through academic instruction, but through vigilance, compassion, and the willingness to look deeper when something doesn't seem right. It demonstrated that the most vulnerable often can't or won't ask for help, making it essential for the adults in their lives to notice the small signs, the behavioral changes, the unspoken distress signals. Most importantly, it proved that judgment and punishment aren't always the answer. Sometimes people aren't cruel. They're desperate. Sometimes families aren't failing. They're fighting battles no one can see. And sometimes the difference between a child being removed from their home and a family being preserved comes down to a community choosing to support rather than condemn. Sarah kept teaching for another 20 years after that pivotal spring. She encountered countless students, each with their own stories, their own struggles, their own needs. She helped many of them, though not all. Some situations were beyond her ability to fix, some systems too broken to navigate successfully, some circumstances too complex for simple solutions. But she never stopped trying. She never stopped paying attention. She never stopped believing that every child deserved an advocate, that every family deserved compassion, and that sometimes the smallest observation could lead to the biggest difference. As for Lily, she did eventually become a teacher, just as she'd announced at her kindergarten graduation. After college and teacher training, she returned to Jefferson Elementary, specifically requesting to work with kindergarten students. On her first day, she stood outside the same classroom that had once been Room 12, now renumbered as Room 8, and greeted her new students with the warmth and attention she'd learned from Miss Mitchell. Sarah, long retired by then, came to visit on that first day. The two teachers stood together in the hallway during recess, watching the new generation of 5-year-olds run and play and learn. "Do you remember that spring?" Lily asked, now a young woman but still with those same curly ponytails, though styled more professionally. "Every detail," Sarah replied. "It changed how I looked at teaching forever." "It changed my life," Lily said simply. "Not just because you helped my family, though that was huge, but because you taught me that being seen matters, that someone caring enough to notice can make all the difference. I carry that with me every single day. I look at my students and I wonder what they're not telling me, what pain they're hiding, what help they need but can't ask for." "That's what makes you a great teacher," Sarah told her. "Not everyone learns that lesson. Some people go through their entire careers, seeing only what's on the surface." They watched in comfortable silence for a moment before Lily spoke again. "I have a student this year, Marcus. He's been really quiet, withdrawn, hasn't participated much in the first few weeks. Yesterday I noticed he has these dark circles under his eyes, like he's not sleeping. And when we did circle time on the carpet, he curled up and actually fell asleep within minutes." Sarah turned to look at her former student. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking something's not right at home. I'm thinking I need to pay attention, document what I'm seeing, reach out to the family. I'm thinking I need to do what you did, not assume, not ignore, but investigate with compassion." "Then you know exactly what to do," Sarah said with pride. "Trust your instincts, document everything, reach out for support when you need it. And remember, sometimes the families need help just as much as the kids." Lily nodded, her expression determined. "I won't let him fall through the cracks. Not on my watch." "That's my girl," Sarah said softly. The bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Students began lining up at their designated spots, preparing to return to their classrooms. Lily squeezed Sarah's hand once before heading toward her class, ready to gather her students and continue the important work of not just teaching but truly seeing the children in her care. Sarah watched her go, this woman who had once been a frightened 5-year-old standing beside a chair because sitting hurt too much. The cycle had come full circle, pain transformed into purpose, suffering alchemized into service. A child once saved now, dedicating her life to saving others. As Sarah walked toward the parking lot, passing classrooms full of young voices and the echo of lessons being learned, she thought about all the Lilies out there. Children carrying burdens too heavy for their small shoulders, families fighting battles in the shadows, silent suffering waiting to be noticed by someone who cared enough to look. The world would always have problems too big for any one person to solve. Poverty would persist, systems would fail, families would struggle. But in the small corner of the world that was Jefferson Elementary, and in countless schools like it across the country, there were teachers paying attention, there were communities ready to rally, there were people choosing compassion over judgment, support over condemnation, action over indifference. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough to change everything. If you found this story moving and important, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our educational content. Share this video with teachers, parents, social workers, or anyone who works with children, because awareness saves lives. Drop a comment below telling us what you learned from Lily's story, or share your own experiences of times when someone's attention made a difference in your life. These conversations matter, and your engagement helps us reach more people with stories that educate and inspire. Remember, every child deserves to be seen, every family deserves compassion, and every one of us has the power to notice the small signs that something isn't right. Whether you're a teacher, a parent, a neighbor, or just a concerned citizen, your attention and action can be the difference between a child suffering in silence and a family getting the help they need. The marks under Lily's clothes weren't signs of intentional cruelty. They were signals of a family in crisis, of poverty pushing people past their breaking point, of parents trying desperately to keep their children safe while drowning in circumstances beyond their control. The real lesson isn't just about noticing physical signs of distress. It's about looking deeper, asking questions with compassion rather than accusation, and understanding that sometimes the help people need isn't punishment or removal, but support and resources. If you're a teacher watching this, trust your instincts when something seems off. Document what you observe. Reach out to families with concern rather than judgment. Connect them with resources. Be the bridge between their struggle and the help that's available. You might be the only person in that child's life who notices, who cares enough to act, who fights to keep families together rather than tear them apart. If you're a parent struggling right now, please know that asking for help isn't failure, it's strength. There are resources available, communities ready to support you, people who understand that circumstances can spiral beyond anyone's control. Don't let shame or fear keep you from reaching out. Your children need you, and they need you to be safe and stable and supported. And if you're someone who can help, whether through donation, volunteering, advocacy, or simply being aware of the needs around you, please do. The Thompsons were saved by a community that chose to step up. Furniture banks, church benevolence funds, employer compassion, school emergency funds, neighbors offering support. All of these small acts combined to create a safety net that caught a falling family. Lily's story had a happy ending because people noticed, people cared, and people acted. Not every story ends this way, but more of them could if we all committed to paying attention to the children around us, supporting the families struggling in our communities, and choosing compassion over judgment when faced with difficult situations. So watch for the child who won't sit down. Notice the one who's always hungry. Pay attention to the kid wearing the same clothes repeatedly, or the one who flinches at sudden movements. See the quiet signals of distress that children send when they've been told not to tell, when they're too young to understand how to ask for help, when they're protecting their families from scrutiny, even at the cost of their own well-being. And when you see those signs, act. With compassion, with wisdom, with the understanding that most families aren't intentionally harming their children. They're just desperately trying to survive circumstances that have overwhelmed them. Be the person who investigates rather than assumes, who supports rather than condemns, who builds bridges rather than walls. Every child deserves a safe place to sleep. Every child deserves to come to school without pain. Every child deserves to be seen, really seen, by adults who care enough to look beyond the surface. And every family deserves the chance to overcome their struggles with support, rather than judgment. That's the legacy of Lily's story. That's the lesson we should all carry forward. That's the difference one observant teacher, one compassionate nurse, one supportive principal, one generous community can make. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for being the kind of person who would sit through a 50-minute story about a little girl who couldn't sit down. Your attention to this story suggests you're exactly the kind of person who would notice a lily in your own life. Don't ignore those instincts. Act on them. You might just save a family. Until next time, keep paying attention. Keep asking questions. Keep supporting the vulnerable. And keep believing that your actions, no matter how small they might seem, can change the entire trajectory of a child's life. Because they can. Because they do. Because they did for Lily Thompson. And they could for the next child who desperately needs someone to notice, someone to care, someone to act.